We're just going to scroll through some of the slides just for maybe someone that wasn't here, the resources for this. When I was going to start doing the class, my schedule has been, and brain has been like super full, so I asked Scott for some assistance because on a lot of the classes, when people are teaching, they write their own curriculum, so there's like a huge like time investment to do that. And so I had asked him, because I'm also serving on grand jury and working full time, so there's just a lot going on. So he had sent me Capitol Hill Baptist Church, and you all can go there, and they have a section called Core Seminars, and you can look up, there's amazing classes on there, and they had one on neighboring. And I had asked Scott about it, and he said that was something that they wanted to do a class on. And so I was like, oh, great, I could do that. And I started reading it, and I was like, Washington, D.C. is a little different than here. So, and it was 2 men teaching the class. So it was just a wildly different class, but it was a nice little seed to start. And there are a lot of things that they reference that, I've kind of like incorporated, but that was kind of where I got the general idea. So the other thing is the book called The Art of Neighboring, and that's where that little chart comes from. It's a super easy read, and there's little questions that are in the back, and it would even be great if you all wanted to do like a little book club with each other and kind of everyone read it and hold each other accountable. It's a great book. So, and the chapters are broken up. There's, I think, like 6 or 8 chapters, so it would really work out for like a book club kind of thing. The other thing is Revive Our Hearts Ministry. As I started this class, they started a whole series of, I think, 15 classes called You're Welcome Here. And it was based off Nancy DeMoss Wogelmuth, a series that she did in the year 2000. And it is really interesting, everything that she said still applies. That you're just like, that's crazy that there've been a lot of changes in the last 24 years, but everything she said still applies. The fears are still there, the challenges are still there. Obviously, we have more challenges and more distractions. But if you all are listening for a great little 20-minute podcast to listen to every day, maybe when you're walking or whatever, it's excellent. The other one is Reaching Lost Sheep, Dr. Ormsby's class. His class was so accessible and easy to take notes, and it just really spurred a lot of thought and was like really encouraging, and in certain areas really discouraging. Not that he was discouraging, but just a lot of the challenges that you have with reaching lost sheep. So you all should go back and listen to that. It's a great class. And then the biblical hospitality class that I taught in 2018, it's on the app and the YouTube channel. So there's some references that may kind of overlap from that. In future classes, there's going to be the book called Bless that I'm going to reference. I only use this for like one thing, but there are some excellent questions that are in here for your family. It just kind of gives you a nice template, like how do I do this? And especially if you have a family, there's more people in your house, you're trying to get them to understand the value of moving beyond hey neighbor and opening your door. This book is an excellent one to kind of start those conversations. So that's the resources for this. 2 primary goals for the class: a vision for what it looks like for a Christian to love our neighbors better, and an understanding of some challenges, real and or perceived, with loving our neighbors. So those goals are going to stay the same. Those were the area focuses for week 1. So did anyone make contact with one neighbor this week? Okay. That's okay. That's like, that's the great thing about technology, that it's great that you already had their phone number to even be able to do that. So just to take that one little step to move beyond kind of what you've been doing. I mean, there have been some people that told me, oh, I've lived in my house X amount of years and I've never even like learned their name, or I haven't talked to the new people that moved in or whatever. So that's your all's challenge again this week, is to continue moving on that. So with this, your block map, what we're going to do is I want you all to, if you were here last week, you filled in the block map with the neighbor names that you knew that lived around you. If you live in the country, obviously you kind of have to think a little bit more abstract and go, well, what does this look like? Because we don't have houses that fit like this. You all get what I'm going for by doing the block map. We don't have to get real crazy about that. Do you know anyone that lives near you? That's what I'm saying. So when you're looking at this, now is that next step. So what we want to do is to look at that block map and start to think, how would my neighbor identify me? So if you all have your block map, go ahead and take that out. And I want you all to look at those names that are on that, or even if you don't have it, just think through. Would your neighbor say you are, and think of like each house. Would the neighbor behind you or to the left of you, right of you, across the street diagonally, whatever that looks like for your neighborhood, would each of those people say you are unknown to them? Would they say that you're their enemy? Like it could be like you had some type of disagreement because you blew leaves on their yard. It could be that, they have a barking dog and, you have a barking dog and they don't like that. There's a lot of reasons. So enemy can sound really crazy. I mean, maybe you've decided to put an old Chevy up on blocks in your front yard and they don't like that. Whatever it is, this is how your neighbor would identify you. Are you an acquaintance of theirs? And then you have to go, are they my friend? And my dad told me once that I use the word friend too loosely, and I do. And he had said, Jenny, you'd be lucky if you could count the people that are true friends on one hand. And I mean, those are really like your ride or die, here's my kidney type of people. And so, there's going to be a lot of people that you probably are going to categorize as an acquaintance when you're doing that. So you'll, like I said, just take a second to look at that for those people around you. So then, beyond that, think about if you ask your neighbor, let's say you start to have a conversation with them, what would you think they would say is one of the greatest problems in your neighborhood or on your road? Let's say you live out in the country. What would you say they think the biggest problem is in the area you live in? Would it be crime? Maybe that hasn't been a problem before, but now, maybe they changed some roads and that's become an issue. Would they say that there's a dangerous curve, there's litter? Then go, how could you use that to connect with that neighbor? Is there something that you could do to say this could bring us together and start more conversations, but bring more people in? Who doesn't love Andy Griffith and a good Aunt Bee story? So, in this episode, Aunt Bee, she ended up finding out that her Eggman of many years was getting thrown off his land. And I don't know if you all have ever watched, has anybody watched this episode? Okay. It's really great, but it does end in moonshine, so just spoiler alert. So, but what she did is she found out he was being forced off his land. And she decided to do something about it. So she got Clara, because of course Clara's got to be in everything. And then she got Ellie Walker, who was, the pharmacist in town, and she got a lot of other ladies in her neighborhood to really stand up and say he shouldn't be kicked off his land. And then what ended up happening as a result out of this episode and everyone coming together, she ended up having the Darlings come in. Now these people, this family is amazing. So they're so funny. So, but she ended up, because of this, she ended up having the result of an opportunity to show hospitality in her house, because after all of this, it was like, hey, why don't you all come in? Why don't you eat? Because they formed a tighter relationship and got to know each other. So you all can use that collective cause to then turn it into an opportunity for hospitality. But you have to kind of think, what does that look like? Is it that, our street is poorly labeled, or, where my parents live, they used to live what I would consider to be super out in the country in the pre-Toyota days. And now it's like, if you were at Evans Orchard and your child ran real fast and got away from you, well, they're going to visit my parents. That's what that looks like. So, it is really interesting, but because they do a lot of things with their venue now, they have fireworks and there's all kinds of things. Well, there's a lot of horses that are out there, and so that creates an issue for the horses. So, you can really think oh, what are we going to do? Are we anticipating the 4th of July that, we've had problems in our neighborhood before? So you all just really kind of think out of the box for how you can kind of start some of those conversations. You can also start thinking about those really sweet opportunities where you could say, I want to lose a few pounds. I want to start walking in the neighborhood, but I don't want to do it by myself. I'm going to ask a neighbor if we can start doing that. Let's figure that out. You could also say, you can bring your kids into it and say, I want my kid to work this summer, and just go over and say, look, my kid, they are not going to sit inside all summer long. What can my kid do to help you? Use that as an opportunity. I mean, my parents put us in the back of a pickup truck and said, you're going to go work in tobacco. And we were like, okay. And it was so hard, but then all of a sudden, we ended up knowing everyone that lived out there on those farms, because you just worked with them every day, and they looked out for you, you looked out for them, and you could rely on them, and it just taught us so much. So again, use your kids for labor. You heard it here first. So if your neighbor doesn't know your name, then you probably haven't had them in your yard. You probably haven't had them inside your home, on your porch. You probably haven't even gotten to the good stuff, the gospel. So you can see how a hey neighbor greeting is friendly, but it kind of is like a pleasant, invisible fence. It just kind of stops right there. You see them, you wave, you're like, oh, hey neighbor, and then that's kind of it. So you really want to get beyond that point. So there's going to end up being a lot of really friendly, pleasant people that we're just not going to see in heaven. And could you imagine those people being your neighbors? They're friendly, they're really nice, there isn't anything that I have that they need. So we really need to start showing God's love to our neighbors. So I want you all to turn to 1 Peter 4. We're going to read 7 through 11. So 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11. I'm going to read from the NIV. Sometimes there's certain words that in the ESV and the NIV, there's just certain words that you're like, oh, I don't know, this sounded different, this sounded more accessible, whatever it is. So if mine's a little bit different, I am reading that one from the NIV. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be clear-minded and self-controlled so that you can pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sin. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully, administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. So, we are all called to offer hospitality to one another, and we're supposed to do it without grumbling. It is evidence of true conversion by us showing hospitality. That's actually our conversion of our hearts that are actually showing that our hearts have actually changed. James 2 tells us genuine faith in God results in genuine changed lives. And it tells us again in verse 8, love your neighbor as yourself. Your faith expresses itself through hospitality. Would you invite someone into your backyard or your home or your life if you didn't know their name? I mean, would you just randomly just be like, okay, come in. No, and then furthermore, take a step further. Like you tell your spouse or your mom or whomever, oh, I invited someone over. And then they're like, oh, who? And they're like, I don't know, I didn't get their name. They'd be like, are you crazy? Like you've invited. But if you said, oh, Ellie's coming, you'd be like, oh, that's great. How do you know her? So you really, it's like that name, understanding and knowing someone's name changes it from really being a stranger to all of a sudden going, this person is now an acquaintance of mine, which shows that it's relationship building. So now some of you are extroverts, and the idea of getting to know your closest neighbor sounds less challenging than for those of us that are introverts. And I am an introvert forced extrovert, and it's exhausting because I'm someone that just wants to blend into the wallpaper at all times. And so that's very hard for me because it's just gigantic to step out of my comfort zone. I mean, it is gigantic to step out of my comfort zone to be on the welcome team here, just because I just want to blend in and go completely unnoticed. So I understand that this isn't going to be something that's easy for a lot of people, because it's not easy for me. But think of it like in these terms, like menopause and stress has caused some hair loss for me. And, it creates those nice little like balding spots that are right here. And so it has required that I part my hair on the opposite side of what I had been parting it on, because otherwise it would just be like a canyon of just baldness. And so it felt so weird when I started parting it on the other side, because my hair's just not used to it. It's bent towards one way. It felt so uncomfortable. Like you're just like this. It feels weird to part your hair on the other side. If you don't believe me, do it. Just try to do it, and it just doesn't lay right. But it's like that muscle memory, and showing hospitality and talking to your neighbors is going to be a very similar way to that it can be bent one way, but over time, all of a sudden, it just feels natural. It's like, oh, this is exactly how it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to feel. So think of it in those terms. So when asking ourselves why loving our neighbor matters, we have to ask, what does our heart say about God's heart? I mean, when we're thinking, well, why do I even need to do this? What does our heart say about God's heart? Luke 6:5, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So, what's your mouth saying? I mean, is your mouth saying nothing to your neighbor? Then you even take it a step further. Is the way that I'm saying it the proper way? Is it grace-filled? Is it kind? Does it have snotty tones? Is it sarcastic or whatever it is? Like, we all have our own issues. Sometimes when I'm thinking, which isn't a lot, you all know that, but sometimes when I'm thinking, I get a very serious expression on my face and I look super mean. And I'm not one of those people, like Catherine has a super pleasant face and she has dimples, so no matter what, it's like she's just always going to have that pleasant face. And for me, I start out with like a scowl. So like when I get real serious, I can look real mean real fast. And I'm definitely not. So, you have to kind of have that little self-awareness to go, the way I'm saying things matters as well. So how you use your voice, your countenance, your body language. When you're talking to someone, are you like really closed off and just like looking around, and they're talking to you and you're just like kind of looking out the window or whatever, or you're just like, okay, we've got to get this figured out because I've got someplace else to be. Like, people can pick up when, you're really bored or you have someplace else to be. The way you're saying things is that invitation to other people. So if you're saying it and you're a representative of God, are you being hospitable in your words, in your delivery? Are you offering a place of comfort? Are you being welcoming? Are you being rushed, maybe unaware or even harsh? Loving our neighbor matters because it's part of how we get to show off who God is. Like, we get to show other people who God is simply by opening our mouth and the way we conduct ourselves. And we have to remember that in our jobs, with our spouse, in front of our children, in every interaction. You know, I went to Chipotle yesterday and I felt like I was being tested. And, you know, it's just like their service has gone downhill dramatically and the patience that it required. But, you know, I knew going up there, it probably isn't this person's fault that everything's going wrong right now. So you have an opportunity, even in those frustrating, like simple things where you're like, I'm just trying to get some food to go home, to show that kindness. So does our heart for people in our homes make others want to know more about God? That's a big question. Does our heart for people in our homes make others want to know more about God? Dr. Ormsby's class really went over this for reaching lost sheep, that it is no longer just like people stumble into church whenever they're ready and they know that it's there and they know all the general Bible stories and they know all that stuff. We are no longer living in that day and age. We do not even live in a day and age where people know Bible basics. They don't. We're living in a day and age where a lot of people look at Christians as an enemy, because there are things that we believe that others feel are not as inclusive as it should be, to use a catchphrase. And so you have an opportunity to really show people, wow, you're different. You're not what I expected. And if what we're showing is really confirming what they all believe, then we're doing something wrong. I'm not saying that tolerance is not acceptance, but you can be nice to people even if they have a wildly different background and set of circumstances. Their language can be wildly different than yours, and you have to work through that. And the more you shield yourself from reaching certain people that may be very different from you, you're missing those opportunities. So your neighbor may even be that way. But, you know, just take that into consideration, that your heart and home should make others want people to know more about God. So Jesus commanded all of us to love our neighbor, and obedience isn't optional. Just isn't. I mean, you know, like with your kids, you don't say obedience is optional. You're like, oh, you don't want to do it? Okay, good, we're fine. Go about your day. No, obedience isn't optional to this. Luke 9:23 reminds us we're all to live our lives totally sold out for Jesus. We're using every moment to do his work, to take up our cross and follow him. But it's going to look a little different for each of us. I mean, I look in this room and I can just see that there's a lot of different gifts, different time constraints, different seasons. It's just going to look different. Like there's different weaknesses in here. There's different opportunities that people are going to have because of the neighborhoods that they live in. That's going to dictate some things for people. And so we need to notice certain areas where, with the gifting and opportunities we have, we can step into that, but also potentially pull somebody else in. I mean, there was someone that's been visiting our church, and I'm not from Frankfort. And so I don't know who knows who. I don't know if they've been here before and they're not in the same age group as me or whatever. And I just had to reach out and send a little message and go, hey, this person's here, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, come to find out, like, they knew each other. They went to high school. They didn't realize that they had been coming here. They hadn't seen them. And so don't be afraid to, like, reach out to other people. You know, I think are in a great location where we do have people from Lawrenceburg, from Versailles, from Scott County, from, you know, Frankfort, Fayette County, you know, various places. So, you know, we have a lot of resources that are here to pull people in. If you find out that someone maybe, you know, oh, my neighbor lives in Lexington, you know, I invited them. Well, you might go, oh, my sister lives in that neighborhood. And now all of a sudden you have like a neat little connection. So pull each other into those things. So are we planning around God and the work He's commanded us to do, or are we planning our lives around what we want to do? And if something randomly comes up and kind of falls in our lap, then we say yes, but God's more in the margin instead of the main. We've got to really focus on that. So have you all ever done one of those little slide puzzles? Okay, I tried to find one of those. Apparently I'm 187 years old because they don't exist. And I found one on Amazon, but it was $24, and I'm not spending $24 on it, so I did a picture instead. But you all are familiar, it's a little carnival puzzle. There's one little spot that's empty, and then you just move the pieces around to eventually get them in the order they're supposed to be in. And so the biggest obstacle to taking the second part of the Great Commandment seriously is time. And so it's not that you have to do something really, really crazy. For some of you all, especially those that are in a busy, busy season, you don't get a pass because you're in the busy season, but it just might mean moving around some of the things. It doesn't mean you're taking anything out. You still have all the exact same parts. You're just going to have to move some of those parts around to get in a better order with higher priorities. That might mean that you move the barbecue grill to the front yard. And you just, it's amazing how when people are out walking and they smell like burgers cooking, it opens up conversation. Like, people will be like, those burgers smell great. Like, they'll yell that out. Well, already plan ahead and throw 2 extra burgers on the grill, and then just be like, we have extra. I was waiting for the first person to say that to me. Why don't you eat with us? They might say no, but now you've had like a little bit of a conversation with them. And so you also know people are kind of noticing that. So again, like, you might have all the same parts, you're just starting to do them in different things. I think Ryan and Ramsey do an excellent job of sitting on their front porch, and they always share pictures of sitting on their front porch. And I love that, because people notice when you're sitting on your front porch. That could be reading, that could be scrolling on your phone, that could be having your kids play in the front yard instead of only the backyard. But you're opening up other people seeing you. You don't know what they're doing. I can't tell you how many times like I've been at home and like I've looked through the blinds and I'm like, what's going on over there? So I'm sure that there are people that are noticing Ryan and Ramsey that they don't know are noticing them, that are just creeping in their house like me. That, it's like, but it's changing those little flows. They could easily, I don't know what your backyard looks like, but you probably could easily play in your backyard, but you all have made a choice to be in your front yard. And so that is, Catherine and Scott, they have the most amazing front yard. It's like the size of 87 football fields. It must be fantastic to mow. But yeah, and so, they have a great opportunity to really spend a lot of their lives in that front yard where other people will see their children playing or them out there doing things or tending to whatever. Just adjust whatever you have. If you're in one of those, super busy seasons, just adjust the parts so that they're more fitting for your neighbors to see you and to open up those conversations. Again, you don't have to do crazy planning. It's not like you have to spend a lot of extra money to do those things. But right now we live like in this kind of tension between urgent and important. Like, it seems like everything in our lives are urgent and important. We're just constantly trying to figure out, like, how do we do this? When our priorities are determined by our desires and our needs, our lives aren't going to match up with our intentions. So you're going to develop that muscle memory from going from, hey, neighbor, into, like, let's actually have a conversation with someone. So let me ask you, Pat. So if your child wasn't one of your children, if they weren't successful when you were potty training them, would you just be like, oh, well, right. Right. Did you stop at the 4th failure? No. I'm sure that you had multiple children, so I'm sure that you even had setbacks well after the fact that you were like, I thought we had this taken care of. Isn't it funny that, like, Could you imagine being like 30 and trying to learn to be potty trained? Right. It's like you didn't give up. You kept at it. You just didn't say after that very first failure, oh, well, back to diapers, the end. They'll figure it out when they get older. No, I mean, that's not how that ended up working. Scripture does not tell us to not wet the bed. It does tell us that we're to love our neighbors. And we put all of this useful, don't get me wrong, we put a lot of effort into all of these things that we see value in, but then there are some things that we are commanded to do in Scripture that we're simply not doing. And it comes down to, are we seeing that value in it as much as the other things that are good, but there's things that we really should be focusing much more time and effort on, and we're just simply not. So be thinking about, like, am I putting the effort into this that I should? Do I keep getting shoot down? Sometimes, like, if you have put in a whole lot of effort with all your neighbors and everyone's like, no, 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 no. Well, the connective thread is you, so maybe, there's some work in what you're doing might not be the best approach, because if you go up and you're like, Jesus, that's going to maybe scare some people away. So you have to also look at maybe what you're doing isn't what they're receptive to. So you have to take that into consideration. So Jesus got stuff done. Repeatedly in Scripture, we read where he did a lot of crowd work, but also he was reaching the individual. And then we'd read again, he's doing it all again. There was no making up time on the interstate. So like if he got like super busy and got behind and stuff, it's not like, oh, well, we'll just hit the gas real hard when we get on the interstate. We'll make up that time. Then we'll be at the next thing and we'll be able to do that. No, he was walking most everywhere. And, we didn't read where he's like frantically rushing and frazzled and running places and going from place to place and had no margin. Like, we don't read that. That's not what's happening with him. He was never hurried. He had time for people and conversations. And in John 4, Jesus spoke with a Samaritan woman at the well. And since Jews don't have anything to do with Samaritans, this really was outrageous. And some of our neighbor conversations are going to start out that way. They're going to be like, why are you talking to me? Some of us are going to live in areas that are very different. Like I have lived multiple times in the most underserved areas in Lexington on purpose, but there are a lot of challenges that come with that, and people are very, very suspicious of why you're talking to them, especially when you don't look exactly like them or have a similar background. So you might run into that situation where it's like they're looking at you like, should we be speaking? Do you have something that could help me? Whatever it is. And the answer is like, yes, I should be speaking to you. And yes, I do have something that can help. So we have to remember that not everyone is going to come from the same background that we come from, even if they live right next door. We just probably don't know what their story is. And we need to be careful with that and mindful that if we are coming on too strong, that could also like push them away as well. So we need to like live at a pace where we're available to those around us, not just our current friends and families, but also our neighbors. There are so many crummy things that happened during the pandemic, but one of the things that I loved most about the pandemic is everyone slowed down. I mean, there was like a lot of complaining, but like everyone slowed down. And doesn't it feel like we all forgot that? Like we forgot how to do that part of it. And how quickly everyone went back to like their natural tendencies, whatever it was. It was like we got the green light to go and we hit the gas to make up for lost times. One of the things that our neighborhood did is we did a neighborhood zoo, because there's small children that live in our neighborhood. And so we would put like a little stuffed animal in one of our windows. And so families with small kids would walk around the block and try to find the animals in the windows at houses. And then you would if you had more than one stuffed animal, you would switch it out, switch to a different window, do something like that. We also did where we would do like a little obstacle course, hopscotch thing. We would draw that on the sidewalks. And what's really funny is barely any child knew what to do, but every adult did it, and we loved it. It was so great to watch that, but multiple neighbors did that. Then you would also find out there were some neighbors that were in the neighborhood that were amazing chalk artists that just, it created this fantastic opportunity to have conversation with them, because it's just like, that's bonkers. Like, how did you do that with chalk? And so you could just exchange names, have conversations. Did you go to art school? Like, how are you able to do that? You're so creative, you know, and then it like leads to, oh, I also play music. And then you just, like, those conversations come out of that. Like, I miss those things from the pandemic, but we can bring some of those things back. Like, not the pandemic, but just some of those, like, slowing down to really notice your neighbors and be in your neighborhood. We can bring those things back. So if we all just kind of slowed down just a little bit, could you imagine like what we would notice? Like if we just slowed down just a little to notice like what's happening in the houses around us, not the entire neighborhood, just the houses around us. Like, you know, recently there were a bunch of cars that were at one house, and you know, you could see the way people were dressed. And I was like, I turned to Daniel and I was like, somebody's passed away. Just because you're like, I understand what's happening here. You think that's not an opportunity, like, to like speak into their lives in some way, just with love and kindness and compassion, and follow up after the fact that, you know, it's very clear that something sad had happened. But again, it requires just slowing down and noticing. It's amazing what just going on a little walk can reveal to you regularly in your neighborhood. And just even pointing things out, if you're walking with smaller children, pointing those little things out to your children and just being like, oh, look, they planted flowers. Look how beautiful their flowers are. You know, did you know that they're going to have to, you know, replant those year after year? Or, you know, those are going to come back next year. We get to see how big they are. And then if you see that person out in the yard, you're like, it looks beautiful. Like your flowers look beautiful. Like you have that opportunity to really start speaking those things into their lives. So there's an author, and his name's John Ortberg, and he states that hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. He coined the phrase hurry sickness. And he goes on to say that the reason hurrying is so dangerous is because love and hurry are not at all compatible. Because love always takes time, and time is the one thing that hurried people don't have. Isn't that great? I mean, it's not like you all, you know, you fell instantly in love with your child, and that is a different situation. But in other relationships in your life, it required, you know, it's not like you saw your spouse. Most people don't have love at first sight, but it's not like you would even say love at first sight is true, genuine love. You know, there was something you noticed about that person that caught your eye. It could have been kindness. It could have been, you know, oh, they have really pretty blue eyes, you know, whatever it is. But it's not like you truly fell in love with that person. It takes time, and we just can't do that if we're going at a crazy pace. So let's turn to Luke 10. We're going to read verses 38 through 42. So Luke 10, 38 through 42. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, I'm sure you all, especially if you have a sibling, you can figure out what that tone probably was. Like, I can picture myself, my sister and I were a year apart, and I could picture myself being like, why are you sitting here while I'm doing all the work? I mean, I can completely hear myself saying that to my sister, and I can see that they probably did that similar thing. But it was, Martha did the right thing. She's the one that's like, I'm inviting you into the house. And so what she did is then immediately get distracted with all of these other things that were good things, but it really took away from that main thing. So as we invite people into our homes, we can't all of a sudden get frazzled. Already be thinking before you have someone come in your home the first time, what's the next step? What is that next step? Even if you're somebody that you're like, you know, I have a coffee pot, I don't normally drink coffee. Maybe you just keep some on hand. You know, maybe you have, different types of tea on hand, just in case someone, prefers to have tea. Maybe you have something specific for when someone comes into your home. So when that happens, mentally you're like, it's go time. I don't have to think through and be like, oh, I feel so crazy and rushed. Like you kind of already have that general plan of what you're going to do when someone comes in your home, especially if that isn't like your normal pattern of things that you all would do. So Martha wanted to serve Jesus well, but she first welcomed him into her home. And I couldn't help but think, like, as I started like reading that and rereading that, then I thought of like Rosario Butterfield. Do you all ever do like one of those mental spirals when you're like reading something and then it just turns into one thing to the next, to the next, to the next? That's what I did. And so then I started thinking about, like he came across her threshold, and Rosario Butterfield's your, hospitality comes with a house key. And then, I started thinking about doors. And then I started looking up like, oh, okay, there's like a significance to doors here. And I started thinking about definitions of hospitable, hospitality. And so hospitable, friendly, generous reception, entertainment of guests, visitors, or stranger. Now these come from the dictionary. I mean, it's not like some Bible concordance or these are coming from the standard dictionary that all people would read. Hospitality, hospitable treatment, reception, disposition, promising or suggesting generous and friendly welcome, readily receptive, open, offering, sustaining a pleasant environment. I also thought it was funny that they had open in all caps, like on the definition. Like I don't know why does anyone know that? Okay. I didn't know if somebody knew why they did that it was like all caps in the dictionary. And so then you start going, okay, the concept of openness in the third definition named for hospitable adds a valuable layer to our understanding of hospitality. To be open is to be without barriers, readily accessible, to welcome anyone at any time. That's pretty cool, like when you start looking at that. So having no barriers, such as a door. So it's adjusted to allow passage, to be able to adjust at any moment. Are we flexible or are we inflexible? Are we able to adjust at any moment? Like if you see that there's a need or you see that there's a neighbor or something comes up, are you able to pivot, or is that just something that works in when you want it to work in? So then again, I was thinking about the door being open. And so I started looking up door, and come to find out, door's mentioned 400 times in Scripture. That seems wildly significant, doesn't it? And so I've not been to the Ark Encounter, but maybe you all have, but I stumbled across where it mentioned the Ark Encounter, and they have a whole display that they do about doors. Like, have you seen it? Yeah. And it's Doors of the Bible is what it's called. And they have the ark door, the Passover door, the temple door, the shepherd door, the cross, the tomb, wide and narrow doors. And then they've added commentary and scripture for each of the doors that are referenced. It's really cool. Like, I was like, okay, there's definitely something. Doors are opportunities. They're transitions from death to life. They're opportunities. Both opening and shutting and coming and going out of a door is for His sake and His glory. Maybe what some of us need to do is even put like a little Post-it note at eye level for us as we're leaving the door of our house to remind us that, we're supposed to bring people into our homes, but leaving, Are we representing him? We are image bearers. So maybe just even having like a little post-it note right at eye level as you're leaving really helps you to go, okay, this door really matters. Like when I'm opening it, I'm extending God to other people. So have you ever been like with a friend or family member, you go to like a restaurant or bakery and you have something and it's like amazing? What do? You're just like, try this. Right. Who said that? Who said try this? Yeah, that's what you do. You're just like, try this. And why are you saying that? You want to share it. Right. And why do you want to share it? It's delicious. Right. And amazing. And you're just like, I want you to experience what I'm experiencing right now. So Psalms 34:8, taste and see, the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Others should want to see and taste God's goodness because of us and because of the image of Christ we bear. But you have to be intentional to show God and not just someone being a generally good person. We have to intentionally show that this is God in our lives. This is the Holy Spirit working in our lives. We have to intentionally make sure that we're pointing to him, not just being, like I said, a generally good person. So we are going to run out of time, and I have a lot of, so we're going to read super fast. Mark 5:21 through 43. So let's read Mark 5:21 through 43. I'm going to start reading, and I'm just going to read as fast as I can with messing up only maybe 10 times. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of this synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garment, I'll be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. And Jesus, perceiving himself that power had gone out of him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what was said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was, taking her by the hand, and said to her, "Talitha kumi." She said, "Little girl, I say to me, you arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking. For she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So if we go back to verse 35, it says, while he was speaking, Jesus kept a pace of life, which he had time for interruptions. But this also reveals that he was very, very busy while he was speaking. So while one thing's going on, there's another thing. Somebody else needs him. This other thing's going on. Somebody else needs him. I mean, the crowd's pressing in, and you can tell there's so many people that it's like you're asking who did this. There's no way we could tell. There's so many people. Sometimes, like, we can get overwhelmed just being in our house by ourselves and just be like, oh, I don't want to go out and talk to one person. Like, he's showing, wow. Like, we've got to make sure that as women, I mean, we're really great at multitasking, but we're also multitasking at the right things as well. And so are we also showing that we're living at a pace where our life is, I don't know if this is a word, interruptible? You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to live at that pace where we can be interrupted. That's a better way to say that. Yeah, and if we're not, then, we need to figure out, well, what are some of those pieces that we need to take out? So, for your neighbors, you can think, okay, I don't really need to do much more than saying, hey, we're going to be out of town. Could you just keep an eye on things? Like, you can open up a conversation with something that simple. You could say, I stopped the mail at the post office, but if I get any, do you mind getting it? I don't think I have any packages coming while I'm out of town. But if I do you mind grabbing it for me? I mean, that's like an amazing, super easy conversation starter. And then when you get back, guess what? Conversation 2, you go over. Did anything get delivered? Did I have anything? You could even have like a little trinket or something like, oh, here, I got this for you. Thank you so much for doing that. We have a neighbor that her husband developed cancer and passed away very quickly. And he did all the handiwork around the house. And I mean, they were just amazing neighbors. And so there's like little things that Linda, she's very determined to still do things herself, but there's things that she needs. Like, she doesn't feel comfortable climbing up on a ladder. She's in her 70s, but she works very hard, but she doesn't want to get on a ladder by herself. So she'll come and she'll ask Daniel, hey, could you do this? And, like little things like that. Could you, help me clean out my gutters or something like that? And then she'll write on the tiniest little scrap piece of paper, she'll write, thank you. And then she'll put it like on Daniel's, like, under his windshield wiper, like she'll write like a little thank you. And I mean, it makes me cry every time. It's like so sweet that she does that. But she mows her yard. And then there's like someone who I'll call old, that lives across from her. She mows her yard. And then her neighbor on this side, they have a toddler and are getting ready to have another baby. And she mows their yard. And then one day I saw her pushing her lawnmower down the street. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, I just was like, she said, well, so-and-so who lived on an entirely different block, her husband passed away and her yard needs tending to. I'm just going to go do it for her. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, but we have those opportunities as well. Like, we can be a Linda. Like, there are people that, like, you get upset that you go, gosh, their yard needs to be mowed. Well, you don't know why it's not being mowed. Do you have an opportunity to go help them? And Daniel and I were walking the neighborhood, and Linda does like to walk also, and she came over, and she said, she starts crying immediately, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm a sympathy crier, so if you're crying, I'm crying. And so I just immediately start crying, so I'm like, this is what we're going to do. And so I was like, what's going on? And Linda, she said, I just really want to thank you and Daniel for shoveling my driveway when it snowed this winter. I mean, we're wearing like sleeveless in summer. And I was like, no problem. And she is crying. I'm going to try to say it without crying. And she goes, I feel forgotten about most days, but I felt loved when I came home and saw that you all did that. And so I said, Linda, you need to come over right now and let's watch TV together. And I was like, put your pajamas on because it's close to my bedtime. And so I was like, but I mean, you have an opportunity to do that. And if it's your next door neighbor, seriously, like, why can't you wear your pajamas? Like, people go to Walmart in their pajamas. Why can't you, why can't you go next door? And so she was like, and she was so sweet because she was like, oh gosh, like, I'd love to come over just to be able to just sit and watch TV with someone and just enjoy the company, even if you're not speaking. Like, that's not doing anything. That's just like doing something you probably would be doing. So we need to make sure that we're holding plans and possessions lightly, but people tightly. And so we've got to make sure that we're concentrating on that. So we're going to get to our areas of focus for week 2. We're always going to start out with prayer. We need to make sure that we really are praying for our neighbors. We want to spend every single week of this class praying for our neighbors. Also, spend a specific amount of time this week either walking around the block each day in your neighborhood, being in your front yard or common area, or for those that live out in the country, think of a way that you can maybe be a little bit more creative. But that might even be something where you go, oh, hey, Memorial Day made me think we're having a bunch of people come over for the 4th of July, and I just wanted you to know that traffic's going to increase or people are going to be parked in weird places, but you're welcome to come over too. Like, you could use Memorial Day as a catalyst to already invite someone for the 4th of July. Living out in the country does present certain challenges, so you do have to think differently. But like I said, so pray specifically, how is God wanting me to slow down? Where can I create intentional neighboring margin? Do one small next step with at least one neighbor this coming week. So spend a specific amount of time in your yard neighboring, intentionally reaching out to one neighbor, and then I want you to continue to try to memorize Romans 12:9 through 21. So my parents, they had some property down in the gorge, and my dad, I swear he's not a creeper, my dad's also older, but he saw this woman who was walking, and when I say they lived in a very remote place, it was very remote. So to see someone walking was bizarre. I mean, that just isn't something that would happen. And so Daddy pulled over, and he was like, do you need a ride? Because there's nowhere close. And so she agreed, and, my dad's got his little Marine Corps hat on, and, he's got a big truck, and so, he's helping her up in there, and he was like, where are you going? And there's, this shows you where, there's a place called Coots. And so she was going to Coots to get a ham sandwich, and she also buys her water there, so she bought multiple jugs of water. Well, it's 3 miles one way. And so Daddy was like, okay, so he brings her back. Now, the house that she lived in is a house that we had driven by many, many, many times, and we all thought it was condemned. And so my dad dropped her off, went back, told my mom, and then Gloria went into action. And so she went up there, she talked to this lady, her name was Linda as well, and went in, and the whole roof had caved in, but she had a tent inside this house. And so, it's weird that in modern day times so she had no running water, she had no electricity, and she lived in a tent inside this house that, the roof had fallen in. And the only way that she kept warm was one of those column candles. And that's like how she would keep her hands warm, and otherwise it was just clothes. And then she would have a little Bunsen burner type camp stove thing to heat up some soup or whatever. And so my mom was I think my mom was the best Kohl's customer, because my mom would spend all of her Kohl's cash on Linda, that she would get her gloves and a hat and, various things. And she would take her canned goods, and really it took my parents noticing. I mean, they may have even driven by Linda before and not noticed her. We'd driven by that house every single time that we went to the cabin down there. But we never in our wildest dreams thought that someone lived inside of that house. But it just really took slowing down and then hearing the need and going, I can help with that. That's something I can do. And Linda ended up being the sweetest lady. And she called Daniel spiritual. She was like, I like your beard, you're spiritual. And that's how she said it. We still make a joke about that. But Linda she chose to live there, and that's the lifestyle that she had chosen from some various circumstances. But we considered her a neighbor. She just lived down the road. And we had an opportunity to really pour into her life and show her the love of Christ. She had the most beautiful handwriting. She would write my parents letters. So then she would give my parents like a little thing. It looked like the Declaration of Independence. Like her handwriting was spectacular. So just think about that. Just because someone lives next to you, you don't know what's going on inside their home or where they've been or what they've been through, and you can't make those types of assumptions. So going from hey neighbor to, in our case, hey Linda, requires us to slow down and notice, to use critical thinking skills, to be observant. We have a flash of time to do what he's called us to do. And Jesus lived in a specific rhythm. And does our rhythm look closer to his rhythm or to the rhythm of the world? So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for every person that's in this class. Just really pierce our hearts with what burdens you. Allow us to slow down and really hear the Holy Spirit and where he's prompting us to go and who he's prompting us to speak to. We are so thankful for all the provisions that you've given to us. Please help us to be better stewards of all the things that you've given us, all of our resources, money being the least of those. Thank you for our homes. Thank you for each other and our friendships. On this Memorial Day weekend, we thank you so much for the lives, for the soldiers that gave the ultimate sacrifice for us to be able to live in this country. Thank you so much for that. Please be with Alice's family and loved ones and dear friends as they're walking through grief right now with losing a sweet buck runner that we all love and really cherished. Please be with our sweet Stephanie as she's going through a lot right now, and be with her family. And we are just so thankful for all the many ways that you give us opportunity after opportunity by patiently loving us and teaching us every day and teaching us to be more like you. We're so grateful for you and for this time to gather and worship. Please be with Pastor Chris as he brings the message. In your name I pray, amen.